Welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast, where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the learning and development industry. As always, we'll be bringing some laughter and a bit of fun along the way, but more importantly, you'll get some incredible insights, key lessons, and unique perspectives on everything related and possibly unrelated to training and development. Let's get this show on the road. Hey everybody, welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast. This is the final episode of season 2. Wow, how time has flown. And instead of like first season, where Karen and I kicked off the season and she essentially spun the tables around and did the interview, it became the interviewer and I became the interviewee, we decided this time to do a closing. Keeping that same formula, so I am still going to be the guinea pig in the line of fire. But Karen and I are going to be talking and taking a little bit of a reflection back on season 2, some of the interesting conversations we have, some of the trends that came out of those conversations. So as always, my partner in crime, I'd like to introduce Karen Hidden. She keeps me out of mischief.
On your toes?
Sometimes. Yeah.
Mostly not.
Yeah. So Karen, I'm going to hand this over to you, and I am Patty in your hands.
Yay, I love Patty. Yes, I think just to start off, I loved watching all of the podcasts. It was nice being able to kind of not have the anxiety of sitting there and having to interview people. It was nice to just kind of be in the audience side. I think that there were some phenomenal guests in this season, and definitely a lot of things that came up that I think both you and I hadn't even considered, and I love that. A lot of new lessons, a lot of new metaphors, a lot of new jokes. But I guess for me, I would like to know from you kind of what were some of the things that you felt stood out for you that kind of made you sit up and say, I hadn't actually thought about that from the learning and development side?
There's quite a lot. I mean, from the light-hearted kind of moving from squirrels to bamboo, there was also the there were a few notable things that I think caught me a bit by surprise. I mean, there was obviously all the expected stuff. You know, it's like you're not going to get through any kind of season of a podcast around learning without hitting some form of AI conversation. But the ones that really interested me, because they came from left field, were things relating to how people are starting to look at learning and how we actually do it inside the organization. In other words, the process behind learning. And as an IT professional, I've spent the last probably 15 years of my life, even longer actually, last 20 odd years of my life, looking at all of these different ways of project management, and even starting, back in the kind of early 2000s with this new way of working on projects, this agile approach to project management. And I started with extreme programming, and then it obviously ended up with Scrum and a whole bunch of other things. But I'd never considered that could be a methodology to how we roll out learning and development inside the organization. And it was a bit embarrassing actually, because it was like one of those like really obvious things that you just never connected the dots, and you're thinking, wow, I really should have figured that one out, seeing that I've done this through my entire career. So that definitely was one that stood out. There was also a lot of conversations around the purpose behind learning, which was quite, I think, important and quite unexpected as more how we're starting to transition away from the more traditional kind of serve-up learning approach that learning and development has done to understanding the purpose behind learning and development. And it's such a broad, it's such a small word, which belies a huge amount of complexity.
Yeah.
And everything from how you understand the ecosystem that you're trying to, I suppose, work within, to how you understand the journeys of the people moving through that process, to how you galvanize and drive change. And yeah, I mean, it was just some fascinating things that came out, around purpose and understanding that behind learning development, there's multiple players in there. Each have their own, kind of purpose and true north and things that drive them to wanting to kind of improve their businesses, improve their careers, improve their outcomes, improve their impact. That's really what it's all about.
One thing that I want to ask you on that popped up in the podcast, which I found really interesting, was so if we can figure out the why are we doing the training, which is a big part, right? There's almost a step before we decide on the how. So whether it's a blended approach or hopefully not just sitting in front of a computer doing e-learning or lectures, but there was this really interesting part around, and you and I have spoken about this before, is that psychological safety in people development and making that training safe. I mean, you should think about that only 10% of staff are engaged at work. The right training, learning and development can change this, but it's about creating that environment where people can thrive. You've got a lot of experience and thoughts on that. What is your take on that statement?
Well, I mean, it's for me, it's much broader than just learning and development. I think, a few of our guests in season 1, talked about learning ecosystems and the environment that you need for learning. And my learning out of season 1 is that I've always seen culture and company culture as this almost standalone thing. And starting to understand that company culture and learning and development are so deeply intertwined and meshed.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that are really obvious, but the more and more things you pile onto this kind of learning and development pile, the more you start to feel overwhelmed, and your brain just kind of pushes back and says everything needs to be compartmentalized.
Yeah.
So that the psychological safety for me is a very foundational, powerful element to any learning that takes place in an organization, because one is people have to feel the courage and confidence to have those tough conversations about where they see their career going. Does that career line up to the role that I'm doing? Do I feel that if my career wants to take a different trajectory, that I'm going to be in a safe enough environment where I can speak my mind and not feel like I'm going to make a big career limiting move, through to the kind of post-learning and being able to apply those skills. And I've been guilty. I mean, many people have said, I don't suffer fools gladly because I generally tend to lack a bit of patience. And I've been guilty of this. I've had people who've gone away, learned something in my past, and come back, and I haven't been patient enough with them to let them go through that kind of from learning to mastery. It's the best examples are the project managers or the software architects who went and learnt this new framework, a new methodology, and I was already probably 4 or 5 steps ahead of them, doing things in my way, and I didn't give them the time to and the kind of psychological safety and confidence to be able to try their new skills in a safe way. And I've learnt the mistakes I made in the past, but I think that that's something that's also kind of crept up or cropped up as missing in a lot of environments, is that ability to have the safety to be able to practice and master the skills that we've learned, or otherwise inevitably what happens, and I was victim to this, go on some type of soft skills course, come back to the office, be exposed to a high stakes kind of conflict situation, and then all of a sudden you are you realize just how completely and utterly incompetent you are at implying those skills. So yeah, that was definitely a big kind of learning curve around psychological safety for me, and it was interesting to see it came up a number of times in our conversations.
Yeah, it was really interesting. It's something that stood out to me. I mean, you've just touched on it now, but let's talk a little bit about the soft skills. I think in season 1, there was a lot of talk around the technical hard skills and the importance on that. But what kept on coming up in this season was just kind of the importance of those soft skills time and time again. What are you seeing as the future of soft skills training? What's happening in that arena?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important question, and it was definitely one that both you and I wanted to test and validate, because we've both got strong opinions about this. I think
I just want to say not opposing opinions.
Yes.
We agree on our opinions.
Well, wait till I finished with my question, my answer, and then we can see if they're opposing opinions. The theoretical, I mean, we've all read the theoretical stuff. Like, the theoretical stuff is that the pace of technology in the world today is changing, it's pushing boundaries, it's making things faster, it's challenging a lot of the types of work and jobs that we've done in the past, and it's creating this kind of like ripple effect, this disruption across the industry. And the counter to that is that organizations need to be more adaptable, they need to be more creative, their critical thinking skills are becoming more important. In other words, all of these kind of collective things that sit in this big amorphous basket called soft skills are suddenly getting more attention, more of a spotlight on them. And big consulting companies obviously love to push this. So it's as much as they obviously do set the industry standards. Companies like Gartner and Forrester and PwC, you always kind of take what they say with a little pinch of salt, because it's often they're pushing an agenda. And having said that out loud, I've just basically compromised my ability to ever work with any of those 3 companies, but that's okay.
But we love you.
Yeah. But, you kind of want to see what's happening really on the ground. Is this just consulting speak, or is this a real thing that's happening? And 1 or 2 of the guests this season were what I would call practitioners. In other words, they're not working in, like the kind of bleeding edge future companies that are doing all the latest and greatest. They're kind of stuck in this kind of middle ground. This, you get the kind of early adopters, and then you get the kind of the mainstream adopters and the laggers, and they're kind of sitting at the tail end of those mainstream adopters, where a lot of the large corporates live. And they often adopt things more slowly. And it's evident that soft skills are definitely becoming more of an agenda topic on many of these companies. And there's more of a growing awareness. So it's obvious that things are going to change rapidly, but I'm not sure how rapidly it's going to change. I mean, everybody's talking like, Sam Altman is talking about how he wants to replace all normal jobs with AI. But whether that's going to happen in a year's time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, I can't say it with certainty. I think that it's going to be a slow, grudging change over time. But there's definitely this awareness that soft skills are absolutely critical, and then it comes back to the big challenges, and we had 1 or 2 conversations around this, is that soft skills are notoriously difficult to teach, and in many ways the kind of learning journey of going from learning rote information to applying that information, to mastering that skill so that you can use it interchangeably throughout your day, and not getting to that kind of unconscious competence state where it just becomes part of your arsenal of tools, the things that you kind of are able to apply when you're thinking on your feet and noticing that this situation requires those skills. That's what you ultimately want people to get to. And the traditional ways of training people, have proven that it's a difficult journey. I mean, I think we can, there's been a resounding pushback to e-learning. I think with everything with a pinch of salt, because one or two people, did say there's a time and place for e-learning, and it definitely can work in certain situations, and it's not the kind of the anti-silver bullet of learning and development. But it's where I picked up the big challenge is in that transition of going away and learning what is essentially theoretical knowledge, and a little bit of applied to making that transition of going into that application of that learning. And I think that a lot of people, they're doing things to try and solve that, but it's hit and miss. It works in some places, it works in others, and there's just too many variables at play. Some people will talk to culture and psychological safety and having an environment that encourages that ability to try, to fail, to learn. There's elements of it which talk about kind of cohort groups and the fact that you go back into your organization with people who are on the same level and journey as you, and you've got a safe group to work within. But it's there's so many different factors, and this is like I put myself in the shoes of those people and think, what happens if I don't learn at the same speed? What happens if I don't have as much confidence? If I'm an introvert and I'm not the loudest voice in the room? What happens if that person is in a different department who has a line manager who's really accommodating, but I'm in a different department with a line manager who's constantly under pressure and just wants to get the job done? There's so many different variables, so many different factors, and almost coming back to this lonely conversation is that the reality at the end of the day, nobody will be able to care as much about you, as much about your career as you will yourself. So you've got to take it into your own hands, and you've got to take control of your career. And part of that is having ways to be able to learn at your own speed and your own pace and in your own way. And I don't think we're going to get a lot of that in the working place, but there are, I think, technologies that are now starting to kind of give us the capability to make learning more personalized, to make learning, the application of learning feel more visceral, feel more impactful. And these technologies, I think, are becoming a little bit more mainstream.
Let's maybe talk a little bit about those, actually, because I think something that somebody said is that traditional training methodologies, whether it's e-learning or kind of like textbook learning, we've confused our role as publishers, just kind of pushing out that content, forgetting that it needs to be personalized, that people learn in different ways at different times. Where is the future of learning going if we take into consideration AI, immersive tech? Where is it going?
Well, I mean, when you talk about publishing, I think that there's a first, that's almost a question in its own right, and let me start there. So the days of learning and development being a publisher are really, I think, a thing of the past. And I think, like many areas and facets of the business organism, is that you can't have areas of a system that function independently. Like think if your kind of lungs functioned independently and your brain had no ability to control your lungs, you would pretty much die. You wouldn't know when and how to breathe. You wouldn't know how to keep that flow of oxygen into your blood. So human beings are fascinating systems because everything seems to work in unison with everything else, and when there's a failure in one part of the body, like other organs and other systems try and compensate for that failure, which is what makes us, I think, such an intriguing species. the same applies in many ways to our companies and our businesses. They are systems, they're organisms in their own right. And I think for a long time, these systems and organisms have been allowed to work as independent silos. And learning and development, I think, is one of the last bastions of that type of behavior.
Still doing it.
Where you essentially get someone who sits like the teller at the kind of the driving, the DMV or whatever it is in different countries, kind of give your form into window 1 and then go and pay at window 3. It's felt a bit like that, is you kind of sit there patiently waiting for a line manager to come to you and saying, this is what my team is struggling with, and your claim to fame has been giving that person some sage advice based on your opinion. It's like, if they're struggling with that problem, then maybe they should do this training.
Yeah.
That's all fundamentally needs to change. And the reason that we created the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast, and the reason we had the word impact in it, is because of the fact that I think learning and development is in the stage now where it can have a real meaningful impact on the business. And part of that is moving away from the publisher to the orchestrator. And the orchestrator is someone who understands how every single instrument in their orchestra functions, and how they all need to function in unison and in combination to create something that is going to elicit an emotional response. So in this scenario, it's about understanding the business intimately, understanding all the component parts, and seeing the opportunities for where learning and development initiatives and intervention can help fundamentally make a difference in that organism. And in simple terms, that can be as simple as just understanding what the 3 most critical things, or the challenges that business has, and seeing how you can support it as a learning and development manager.
Yeah.
But then we move on to the second part of your question, which was, what type of specific technologies we're seeing that are starting to kind of help in these situations. So this might sound counterintuitive, but I've always been and always will be a fan for human touch, which is unusual coming from a technologist. Like I support the kind of machine overlords. But I do think where I've had the most significant learning has been in scenarios where I've learned with people in cohorts, and there's something very powerful about that. But that type of approach works to a point, and where when you think about the journey of any expert, is that there is an element of that journey which is a little bit lonely. If you were trying to reach expert level only with a cohort, then you would end up experiencing something I call the lowest common denominator effect. In other words, you would be as good as the weakest person probably in that group.
In your team,
you would set like a kind of a ceiling that you couldn't get past. Some of us just learn at different paces. Some of us just learn in different ways. And there is technologies now, and I mean, obviously the one that I'm particularly passionate about is immersive technology, specifically virtual reality. And up until now, virtual reality has been a very compelling way to learn, but it's been a little bit arduous to build all of these kind of very immersive VR experiences. And when I say arduous and immersive, I'm not talking about the very simple way of let's just shoot a 360 video and put that in VR. So maybe just explain that once, and taking just a slight little kind of detour here, is the one thing that I think we need to be aware of is that, going back to when we were kids and how we learnt, right, like by riding a bike. We didn't watch a video and we didn't read a book and then get on the bike and expect to be able to ride. We learned to ride that bike because we actually got on it and we slowly but surely learned by doing. And we call that experiential learning or learning by doing. And the really powerful realization I had is that ability that we learnt through that trial and error, if you don't ride a bike for 20 years and you get onto a bike, there's a better than average chance that you'll continue to ride. You won't be as skillful, in other words, you won't ramp your bike over the group of 4 people lying under a ramp,
unfortunately,
like you may or may not have done as a child.
But your muscle memory is there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of really impactful way of learning by doing, and when you're just sitting there, and I think that's one of the big challenges with e-learning, is that you're just sitting there as a passenger. You're a passive observer on this process. Information's coming at you, and you're not really able to engage with that information. There's some people might argue that you can have these kind of captive experiences which are maybe more interactive, and you can kind of interact a little bit with it, which is a step in the right direction. But it's up to a point, right? Yeah, exactly. It doesn't feel like it's mirroring the real world scenario. And virtual reality, I think, is there might be an argument to say it's not quite there yet, but I think it's pretty damn close. We're not going to exactly mirror the real world environments because the hardware is still not able to create photorealistic experiences, but the reality is our brain can't tell the difference. So I've seen some very low resolution, like lo-fi type of experiences with heights or spiders or anything that triggers that same response in our brain that we would have in the real world. So it doesn't have to necessarily be an exact replica of the real world. The technology is good enough now to simulate the real world, and by having controllers or hand gestures, we can now start to interact with that world. We can pick things up, we can move things around, we can speak to people, we can hear them speak back to us. The missing part for me has been that's an obvious solution for that kind of technical hard skills type training.
Yes.
And we've done lots of simulations before around how to fix engines, how to service machines, how to do typical kind of practical type job tasks. Coming back to the soft skills thing, that's always been the challenge, because what I've observed is these very kind of e-learning engineered scenarios that just happen to be in VR, where you have a 360 video around you. Someone will pause that video and go, what are you observing right now? And for me, there's not really that big a difference if I had done that on a computer screen or if I'd done that in VR. It's just like the wow factor. And I think, like most people with technology, you get excited by it for maybe the first handful of times you do it, and then it becomes just another piece of technology. I mean, think about the iPad. When it came out, everybody was like, oh, that's so amazing. Now, like tablets, whatever,
just lying around. And I mean, also how measurable are those interactions? Because I think that's also that's something. Well, that's people are.
That's almost where I was going to go to. Is that soft skill thing almost always kind of eluded us, and the big kind of tipping point I felt has actually been now coming back to this AI conversation. And if you think about the typical role-playing scenario that is often used as a tool for teaching soft skills. In other words, I'm going to put Joe and Betty in a conflict situation, and I'm going to tell Joe, you're going to basically act like an angry employee, and Betty, you're going to have to try and basically calm Joe down. What inevitably happens, right? They think it's a big joke, and they kind of chuckle and have a laugh, and or they come up with some kind of completely over-the-top, ridiculous type of scenario. What happens is Joe and Betty might be one of 20 people, and the instructor might just not have time to have all the other people go up on stage. So
Absolutely
you've got
not.
12 to 18 people potentially just watching this process take place. There's no real impact in that. There's no real significant visceral learning.
There's also fear in that.
Yeah.
Because there's also fear of people I don't want to look like a fool in this situation. So not even being able to get into that role play situation.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
they're too scared to make an idiot out of themselves.
Never been one of my faults, but I hear you. I seem to actively seek it like a bug into a bug zapper. But I digress.
I digress.
There's been a recent kind of, this started almost 10 years ago for me when there was this almost non-event that happened is Adobe launched this Adobe Animate software. And we got excited when I was still at a previous company because suddenly you could programmatically affect animation. So you could now change something that had been done painstakingly by an animator, like one frame at a time, was now suddenly something you were able to impact with code. Yeah, and then fast forward and we started to get, this speech to text, and it was hilarious at the start because everybody made jokes about Scottish accents and that they would never be able to use Siri and all of these things, but we've almost got past that phase as well, where recognition, like speech recognition, is becoming almost better than humans' ability to recognize speech. So you've got like all these little individual ingredients. And then the final kind of thing to impact was artificial intelligence, and it's been coming for a while. Obviously, OpenAI made it very, very kind of mainstream and a big conversation.
Yeah.
But this kind of narrow AI solutions, this ability, for instance, to type text and have a computer voice that text and not sound like the machine from war games back in the 80s. It started to sound actually like a normal person's voice. Still, just again digressing, there's no good African AI text-to-speech voices. Anybody out there listening who wants to solve that problem, please feel free to be my guest.
Please email us now.
But, if you now start to talk about how we move from role-playing scenarios into real play scenarios, all the ingredients are there. It just requires a careful orchestrator to be able to bring them all together. And that's what we're trying to do at the moment, is to create these simulations that feel like you're engaging with a real person in a real high-stakes situation, in a real-world scenario, that are engineered on your business. So and what I mean by that last point is imagine this scenario. I'm in financial services. I'm sending my team out to go and basically be trained by someone. Their background and experience is retail. So what happens in that training, I get a whole bunch of retail kind of types of scenarios. I come back into my organization, and none of them seem to fit because they don't apply to my business.
It's not relevant.
So you could say, well, change out the person to a financial services person, but it still doesn't change the problem because that person doesn't know my business better than I know. I know the problems that my team are having on a soft skill side. I know the scenarios that have happened over the past 2 years that have essentially tripped people up. I know the things that are happening frequently in the business that we need to get mastery and control over. And those are the scenarios that I can build in using all of these blended technologies: AI, animation, text-to-speech, speech-to-text, artificial intelligence, VR, all of these things coming together. And I hear people say, things like, VR plus AI are going to give us these things. It's not. It's not just one technology. It's not 2 technologies. It's not 5 technologies. It's as complex a conversation as the learning and development managers are having right now. It's all of these different things. It's animation, it's AI, it's text-to-speech, speech-to-text, it's digital twins, it's virtual reality, it's do you use controllers or hand gestures? Exactly.
Like
and you talked about measurability, so let me come full circle back to that. Is why I'm excited is because suddenly with the ability for it to start picking up facial tracking, eye tracking, I can now start to measure things that have never been possible to measure before. And that is, take voice. Voice, I can use sentiment analysis. So I can tell how anxious or agitated the person in the VR headset is, and I can have the avatar respond via body language to the way this person's talking. I can check whether they are looking at that avatar's eyes. I can check their eye contact. Are they maintaining eye contact? Are they looking away? Are there trigger words that they're using that breaks eye contact? Are there words that they're repeating? Like many years ago, I used to say basically every third word, which basically annoyed the hell out of everybody.
Yeah, so mine was always like.
So how conscious are we? Because often we're not conscious of these things, and this technology can now pick up these types of behaviors, these types of idiosyncrasies we have. Check, are we keeping eye contact? And ultimately, we'll get to a stage where whole human body language would be something that would be detectable by these technologies. We still have a device on our face, which is not the future for me. It's a kind of interim space that we're finding ourselves in. But at some point in the future, whether it's our laptops or our computer monitors or whatever, something's going to start to change that interaction we have with technology and virtual reality. So I think the point here is that right now the technology is good enough for people to start taking advantage of, and it can be that tool that bridges the gap between that rote learning and that applied learning. It can be that tool that helps you learn through that applied learning process in a safe, non-judgmental way.
Yeah, and I think the key word that you use there is tool. It's not the be-all and end-all. It's part of your arsenal. It's part of your, if we go back to your analogy with the orchestra, it's part of that entire thing to make this beautiful sounding symphony where everything has its role to play. I think also something that I just wanted to mention on the measurement side, which I find so beautiful, is that automatic feedback that the leadership team or whoever it is that's kind of rolling the training out is then immediately able to identify where people are doing really well, where there are those gaps, and then how to fill those gaps, because we don't actually get a lot of that stuff from our traditional learning. I guess if it's from a trainer coming in and the talk and chalk method, they might do some sort of assessment. It'll take a while to get all of that back, and by that time everybody's lost interest. So I think it's bringing in that beautiful balance of real-time feedback, personalization, and then filling those gaps where people need those gaps filled, but also really shining a light on where people are doing well, which builds confidence. I think we're kind of getting to the
I want to respond to that, because I think that's something that you touched on, something that's really important there, is that this and you and I have just actually had a very interesting process with one of our customers where we almost have to reset that measurability approach, because too much of our experience is kind of baked into this school way of doing something, is that you go through this learning journey and then you get to this pivotal point where you're tested on that knowledge. And whether you're doing program management or Prince2 certification or an architecture certification or a some kind of Six Sigma or whatever the certifications are, it follows that pattern, is that you kind of learn. You don't know how well you're doing until you write some kind of test or exam, and somebody will give you a point in time kind of opinion of how well you know that information. Now, you liken that to something like a video game, where people need to be convinced often to go and on these courses and study. Nobody needs to be convinced to play a video game.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that I've always felt is because at any given time you can measure your progress. And it's a very cheesy way of looking at it, and completely kind of takes away the complexity of this. But just like looking at the level of your character, the points, the equipment that you have, all of these kinds of things give you feedback as to how well you're doing. How many courses?
I don't actually think it is cheesy. I think people love that. It's that extrinsic, it's the intrinsic. I think
I was talking more about video game producers who might think I'm grossly oversimplifying all of the hard work and mechanics that they put into the game to make it fun.
I mean, it is simple, right?
No, that's definitely not. But it's important though that it feels simple.
Yes.
But kind of going back to that, it's when there's nothing when we learn that gives us that real-time feedback. And even that, that ability to get real-time feedback. So I'll just tell everybody the story is we've just done a soft skills training simulation, okay, for a academy, and they're taking all of their students through this. One of the big challenges we had was taking them on this journey of saying that part of this is having to almost reset the way that you traditionally would measure people. And it's less of this kind of top-down approach of saying, how do I kind of categorize and classify everybody into how well they're doing, and resetting it to more of this kind of mastery journey, is saying the point is not to get someone to do a course and then find out at the end of the year that they've actually, or 3 or 4 times throughout the year, that they're not coping or they're not where you kind of ideally want them to be. The idea in this case is that you're in this kind of soft skills simulation, you're getting immediate feedback, you're being measured against things like critical thinking and sales skills and subject matter expertise, but you're getting that feedback in real time in a very simple, non-distracting way. It's just almost like you would see in a video game. It's like basically a graph, and you can see how well you're doing compared to how well you should ideally be doing. And at a glance, you can kind of see, oh, okay, I'm maybe not as strong on the critical thinking side. But then you can do it again and again and again. Yeah. So the challenge we've had is to get the people at this academy to start to change their way of thinking, to say it's not about letting them do this experience once and going, well, you didn't do particularly well there. It's about letting them do the experience as many times as they need to be able to get complete mastery of that scenario. Yeah. And for me, that's the fundamental difference with soft skills training. It's not how well do I understand some rote knowledge, or how well I can basically follow the steps in this process. It's how comfortable, how confident, how well I can adapt to a situation. And every single situation is going to have unique challenges, and it's being able to put yourself in that situation, because when it comes to the actual real world situation, you're not going to remember page 13, paragraph 2 of the textbook, which basically addresses this, but you are going to remember having done that scenario, which is almost identical to this scenario, 17 times in that VR headset. And you're going to know exactly what you need to do, exactly like riding a bike 20 years later.
Yeah. I love that. I am going to ask you a question that you ask a lot of your guests, is what is something that you're reading or listening to at the moment that you think everybody should know about, or a little nugget of wisdom that you can share with our listeners, Jason?
Sure, that's a difficult one, because I've been reading so many different books at the moment, but I'm not going to give a recent one, if that's okay, because they're all kind of blurring into each other. I'll give one of the books that was an unexpected kind of bit of delight. I had no idea. When you pick up a book and you look at it and you think that's a bit naffy.
That's when you totally judge that book by its cover.
Yeah. Well, I judged the book by its title, actually. So I had read 2 books. The one was called The Theory U by Otto Scharmer, and the other one was called The Fifth Discipline. Could be the 6th discipline. I'm pretty sure it was the 5th discipline, by Peter Singer. So both of these books were quite foundational to my kind of thinking around change management and systems theory, and understanding that there was change within systems theory, and they both came at it from a very similar type of systems thinking angle. So when I saw this book called Presence and I read the back of the book, I thought, now you've got to understand, I'm not a big fan of meditation. I'm not a big fan of and again, at risk of basically putting my foot in my mouth, a lot of the shua type of kind of ways
like the esoterics,
yes, thank you.
Okay, got you.
Yes, thank you for that. Case in point, as I said at the beginning, she keeps me out of trouble. When I read this book, I kind of saw it as, okay, well, I'll read the first couple of chapters and see where this is going, because it seems like that very esoteric kind of way of thinking. And this book was called Presence. And it's one of these books that I think everybody should read, because we all kind of together on this journey in life, and we're all in different, if it was like one of those like kind of old school horse racing games where you like squirted the gun into a hole and you saw your little horse moving, we'd all be in different positions, squirting it like in different directions. Some of us getting in the hole, some of us missing, some of us squirting the friend next to us in the face, because why not? But what we often get trapped and lost in is basically the sense that the grass is always going to be greener the next time. There's always this next thing on the horizon, and I've often said to friends is that I really envy those people who lead very simple lives and are just very content and happy, and feel like half the problem is that as people we tend to seek complexity, seek challenge, and it becomes this defining component of our lives, is that we never seem to settle because we're never happy, and we never take time out, stop, and just actually take stock of what we've achieved and what we've done. And this book was almost like a chastisement of my life at the time, never being happy, never being content, feeling like I was I always had to do 27 things. And it was one of the reasons I actually had burnout early in my career, is I did too many things that no sane human being should do at one time. Yeah. So for me, this book actually fundamentally changed a lot of things for me, changed the way that I saw myself, changed the way that I was able to stop and acknowledge the things that I had achieved, and be able to stay in that moment and appreciate. We often say live every day like it's the last day of your life. I think that's the most ridiculously stupid thing I've ever heard in my entire life, because it's not, and as much as people say like live every day like it's the last day of your life because you never know, well, we don't. I mean, there's a very, very likely chance that tomorrow is not going to be the end of the world, and the day after that is probably not going to be, and maybe the day after that the overlords will take over, and then we'll say, well, I told you so.
And I can tell you that if it was the last day of my life, I would not be working, I would be at an amusement park, and I cannot do that every day. It is just not sustainable.
But I think, that's actually interesting, because the last day of my life I wouldn't want to be at an amusement park. I'd be wanting to do exactly what I'm doing now, hanging around with a cool bunch of hooligans and people that I work with, doing the cool and interesting stuff that I'm doing. And the old me would have basically criticized me right now, saying, yeah, but you could be doing so much more, you could be kind of in a much bigger company, earning a much bigger salary, or whatever, that internal criticizing voice would have been. But it's nice to do something that you really find challenging, that you really find engaging, with people that you really enjoy working with. And that's planned and engineered through a whole lot of moments of presence. That's my book.
I love that. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank
you for being our podcast.
Oh, it's been a pleasure being here. Thank you so much, Karen. Hope I can come back again soon.
Maybe you can, we could just add that book in at the end just for the listeners. I think it's something that would be really valuable for each person, just in terms on their personal journey or their work journey. I'm definitely going to go check it out.
Cool.
Lovely.
All right. Well, thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Jason. Always a pleasure. And thank you so much for the delightful second series. I'm looking forward to the third one.
Yeah, and it'll be coming hopefully probably early next year. We'll do our usual season 2 closeout video with some of the highlights, so keep an eye out for that. But looking forward to season 3 and already starting to have some interesting people on that season. So if you think you've got something interesting to share, please feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah.
We are actively looking for guests for the podcast.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Karen.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. If you found it interesting or helpful, please subscribe by clicking on the button down below so you don't miss our next one. Also, be sure to check out our Reality Bites blog for more information on how technology is aiding in learning development. Links are all in the description below. Go check it out. Thanks a lot. Bye.